I'm not our guest speaker. I am going to introduce our guest speaker. And our guest speaker today is Bob Dauber. Bob is a friend. He's a colleague when we both worked at Montgomery Ward. Raise your hand if you remember Montgomery Ward. We both worked at their headquarters in advertising. So we've known each other for more than a few decades. Bob is a film producer, and he's a marketing maven, and he's co-author of a couple excellent books. Some of you may remember a few years ago, he presented Chicago's Classic Restaurants, a really great book talking about Chicago's restaurants, and it was a great program. So Bob dipped into the North Shore Senior for the first time at that time. And more recently, you may have seen him and when he co-authored Entertaining Chicago, where he talked about entertainment and jazz, which is a real particular interest of Bob. And that program was very well received. I have to say that Bob's career really blossomed when he went down to Texas. So the word maven is not an overstatement for how he was part of that community, particularly with film, but more than that. So what's important to know about Bob is that when he gets involved, he doesn't just dip in, he dives in. Last year, I got a call from Bob, and he said, "Hey, Ron, I think I have time to get more involved as a volunteer. I know that you're involved in some of this stuff. Is there something worthwhile that you can suggest? Any good suggestions?" So a breakfast meeting with Bob last year led to Bob joining the North Shore Senior Center, probably about a year ago, no more than that. Then he became active with our Tuesday Club. And as we all know, the program's person that was such a significant and still is part of our men's club that became Tuesday Club for 20 plus years doing programs. Jay Goldman, in his 90s, suffered COVID, had heart conditions, was hospitalized. And when I called him, he corrected me on 2 or 3 points that I had missed because of my age, and said, "No, Ron, you really need to understand that we had that speaker back in, I think, 2018. And he was right. But what did Bob do? He stepped in, and he's now our programs chair for probably 4 months, and he's doing a wonderful job on that. So what about today's program? Well, Bob has enough stories to fill several hours, but we only have one today. So I will be advancing Bob's slides through the wonders of Zoom. So please welcome my friend, our Tuesday Club's programs chair, today's speaker, and someone you should know, Bob Dauber. And Bob, I don't know if you can see the slides. If you can't, just shout them out. But we've got one on the screen that says "My Story." Go ahead.
Yeah, I can see it on the laptop here. I was when I wrote to you and asked, will I be able to see what's on cue? But that's all right. We know what to do. Good morning. Welcome to, hey, Mike. Jaja and me, and how this came about, and I don't know how this is going to fly either. This is the first time I've done this. So hopefully you will find it entertaining, a little bit informative, tiny bit sensational, but not too much. But just basically my viewpoint of these things that I've experienced. I've been very fortunate to have worked in the industry that I worked in, which is basically film, video, radio, and advertising, and walk away from it without having an ulcer or any chemical dependencies. Very prevalent in that business. Briefly, when I finished high school, went to Sullivan on the north side of Chicago. I went to Roosevelt University because my parents had some mistaken idea that I was going to follow into one of three Jewish traditions of a lawyer, accountant, or doctor. And after a year at Roosevelt, I was invited to leave because of my grades, and which I gratefully accepted the invitation. And I was really at a loss as to what do I want to do with my life. I just had no idea whatsoever. Well, one of my brother's best friends, who was 5 years older than me, and some of you will remember him, his name was Jerry Gahn. He was the original Svengoolie on television here. He became Jerry G. Bishop, a very popular DJ. And Jerry at the time was doing a radio show up in Rockford. And we were having coffee one day and he said, "Hey, why don't you drive up on Saturday morning and sit in with me on the show?" Okay. So I drove up to Rockford on Saturday morning and I sat in with him on the show and I had a ball. It was just a lot of fun. And he said, "Why don't you come back next Saturday too?" So I came back the following Saturday and did it again. Fast forward a few weeks, I wound up enrolling at Columbia College. Columbia College is a communications arts school, which was tiny at the time. Now it's a big deal. They occupy several blocks of buildings downtown, South Loop and so forth. And I fell in love with what was going on at Columbia College to the point where I did basically 4 years work in about 3.5 years. I couldn't get enough of it. But I went with the intention of being a DJ. Yep. And I don't know how many of you people, because you're all from, my era too, remember a guy by the name of Bill O'Connor? He was known as Breathless Bill. He was a pitchman on television and radio. I see somebody nodding. He owned a slew of radio stations and he offered me a job in Ontario, California, right outside of LA. It doesn't get much better than that. However, the Army decided that they wanted me more than Bill did. So I had to fulfill my obligation. And by the time I got out, it was evident that, well, you have to make a decision. The decision was tough because I had already graduated college. I was already married. And in radio, the way you start out, basically, unless you get really, really lucky, you have to go to a small town. Well, after coming home from the Army, I didn't want any part of a small town. So I decided to, quote, fall back on television, radio production, and advertising. And that was the career. Ron, would you put up the book cover, please? There you go. No, come on back. Thank you. You got a clue of what's coming. This man, Jerry Della Femina, is one of my heroes. Veteran of the ad agency awards. I see Jim shaking his head because Jim spent about 700 years with J. Walter Thompson, so he knows what that's about. Jerry Della Femina is one of my heroes because he looked at the advertising world kind of sideways the way I did too. And again, where I said that I don't have an ulcer, one of the reasons for it is that I laughed a lot, and so did he. If you look on the left, you see the book from those wonderful folks who gave you Pearl Harbor. He was working for the ad agency that was pitching the Panasonic account, and Panasonic was looking for a slogan. So think about that. Jerry Della Femina also said, Ron, go to the next slide, please. Making television commercials is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. That's me 100 years ago down in Dallas with, you know who those folks are. I think collectively there might have been an IQ aggregate of maybe 74, but it didn't matter. That's not what they were there for. They were eye candy. Okay, all right, well, let's get to the crux of this. Let's talk, that. This is 1975. I was in Minneapolis finishing up a commercial. We did the majority, for Montgomery Ward, we did the majority of our television production at a company called Northwest Teleproductions, who I subsequently wound up going to work for in Dallas. And they they rolled that out. They expanded in Southwest Teleproduction. So they asked me if I go down there and run it. And that's how I wound up in that rustic setting. But I was finishing up a commercial. It was Friday afternoon. I'd say maybe about 3:30 or so. And I was in the post-production suite. And the receptionist called in on the intercom and said, Bob, you've got a phone call on 2. So I go to the phone call on 2, pick it up. Hi, Bob, this is Fred. Fred was the advertising director of Montgomery Ward. Hi, Fred, what's up? He said, write this phone number down. Okay. So he proceeded to give me a phone number with a 213 area code, which I knew, of course, was LA. And I said, okay, I've got it written down. Whose phone number is this? Pause. It's Zsa Zsa Gabor's. Fred, why do I want Zsa Zsa Gabor's phone number? Because you're going to be shooting commercials with her in 2 weeks. What? I'll repeat, you're going to be shooting commercials with her in 2 weeks. Why? Ward's at the time was starting an auto club similar to AAA, and Sears had one, and they had hired her to be the spokesperson for it. So he said, so what you're going to be doing is you're going to do some radio spots with her out in LA, and you're going to shoot for a couple of days with her out in LA for this new auto club. I said, okay. And she's waiting for your phone call right now. Okay, Fred, I'll get back to you. So I put the phone down. I tried to collect myself. Now, mind you, I was not quite 35 years old. And this really, just came as a shock. I had no prep time whatsoever. So I called and she answered. Zsa Zsa? Yes. This is Bob Dauber. Bob, darling, how are you? I'm fine. But I started to feel like Bob Newhart's routine. Here I am, little Bobby Dauber from Rogers Park, who went to Sullivan High School, is now on the phone with one of the most famous people in the world. And so we started talking about, what we're going to be doing. And it became very apparent she needed a lot of guidance. She needed a lot of direction. And as we talked about the project, it became kind of clear to me that I probably had more talent in my little finger than she had in her whole body, with the exception of one part. So anyway, we talked about, what we were going to be doing. And this was, it was going to take place in a couple of weeks. So I was going to fly out to LA and first have a meeting the day before we did anything else, just have a brief meeting with her about what we were going to be doing that week. Then we talked about producing the radio spots first, and we were just going to record them in one of her dens, at the house. And then we were going to do a couple of days of shooting for the TV commercials. I will spare you the dialect, with the exception of the last line of the phone call. But so we talked about just in generalities of what we're going to be doing. And she told me that the house that she was living in Bel Air was built by Howard Hughes, which I thought was kind of interesting unto itself. I wish I had pictures, but we just didn't bother with production stills a whole lot back in those days. But so here's this house in Bel Air, and we talked about. I said, well, what should I wear, Bob, darling? And I said, I'm going to tell you what to wear. And I'm sure whatever you wear, you're just going to look, outrageously gorgeous. And I'm thinking God's going to rip my tongue out for that. But I said it. And then we talked about, we were going to be filming her standing alongside and then ultimately inside of her Rolls Royce, which is what she called her Rolls Royce. It was her Rolls Royce. We talked about just the generalities again. She said, well, do I have to memorize the script? I said, well, radio, you definitely don't have to. You have the privilege of sitting with the script right in front of you. So you don't have to worry about that. And we will have a prompter for you, when we're out, shooting outside, basically shooting on the driveway of this house, in Bel Air. So Oh, we did talk about that. When you're doing pre-production, there's certain things that you think about that most people don't think about. And one of them is bathroom facilities. What do we do? I said, do we have to, bring one of those things, out to your driveway? No, but she said, she said, I can give you access to one powder room in the house, but you know how men are, they drip. And I said, well, being of that gender, I guess I understand, but I said, try not to hit the floor, but what are you going to do? So, I said, you can have somebody put some kind of paper down or something. I said, really, these folks that I work with are all pretty much housebroken. So I don't think you'll have to worry about it, a great deal. Yeah, well, that's what you had to deal with. All right. So that concluded that meeting. So now the next day, oh, wait, we have to finish the phone calls. As I said, so we've got everything wrapped up. I said, okay, tomorrow we're going to do radio, and then Wednesday and Thursday we're going to shoot the TV spots. And so I said, so I will see you, tomorrow. I'll be out there with a sound team, probably about 10 o'clock. And her final line to me was, I know we will do something wonderful together, Bob Darling. Which I know we will do something together wonderful, Bob Darling. And so that was the end of the phone call. So now we go out the next day, and we're going to do the radio spot. So I just basically had one other person with me, someone with a recorder and a microphone, and we did this in one of her studies. And I was sitting in a Louis XIV chair, or 15th. I couldn't tell the difference. If it didn't come from Nelson Brothers, I didn't know, what it meant. So we did the radio spots, and you're one ahead of me, Rama. That's okay. We did the radio spots, and when we finished, she said to me, my husband would like to meet you. I said, great, tell him to come in. He doesn't live here. Oh, where does he live? Well, he lives around the corner. And, and she told me, she says, you can drive over there. And she told me, which one it was and so forth. And I said, well, that's cool. And so I bid her farewell for the day, thanked her for her time. And, when you work with someone like her and other people I'm going to talk about Joe Namath. When you work with people like that as spokespersons, rarely do you find anybody that's really going to, hit a home run. But you do the best you can, because again, you're dealing with the glow of their personalities and their fame, not so much their performance and hustling, whatever it is you're trying to sell. So we went over to Jack Ryan's house. Jack Ryan lived about a block and a half from her, and there was kind of a winding road going around from where her house was. And driving up to it, you can see that this house was in kind of disarray. Something just didn't look right. Well, it turns out, and again, some of you may remember this gentleman, some of you won't, but the house that he lived in had been previously owned by an actor by the name of Warner Baxter. Anybody remember him? Okay. He was a silent movie star, and Jack had purchased the home. Jack, I didn't know anything about him really, but I found out, prior to the trip, Jack kind of had some interesting credentials. I found out that he was the co-inventor of the Barbie doll. He was, as you see the other items that are up there, he was involved in the development of Hot Wheels and other Mattel type things. And in the lower right picture, now here's a guy who's a co-inventor of a doll, also designed the guidance system for Atlas missiles. So I think a little bit of a dichotomy there between Barbie dolls and missiles, but that was Jack Ryan. I had two other guys with me. We were just absolutely fascinated by what he did, and he, in turn, was fascinated by what we do. Didn't compute, here we just make commercials. That's all we do. He had sandwiches waiting for us. He had drinks waiting for us. We were family, and it was a very fascinating afternoon that we spent with him. One of the things that he talked about, because again, he's an inventor. So if you're looking at the outside of the house, you can see projects that were underway, but nobody working on them. his groundskeeper was kind of showing us around on the exterior of the house. He said, "See that door up there?" "Yeah." "Well, there used to be a stairway going up to that from the ground. It's not there anymore." He took that out. So what's he putting there? We don't know, but he took it out. Okay. "What's this around the base of the house?" "He's building a moat." "Oh, okay. Is he warding off invaders? What's this about?" But the payoff, and I think probably the most impressive thing that he did, what he had done, he had purchased a telephone system off of a mothballed USS destroyer. It had something like 124 phone stations on it. And he bought this thing and he installed it in the house. Mind you, again, this is 1975. He installed the phone system in the house and he rigged it in such a fashion that, and it was dial then, of course, he assigned 3 number codes to each of the stations in the house, so that what he did this for is really kind of novel. He said, Bob says, a lot of times, I get ready to go to bed and I look outside and I see the lights on at the tennis court. Somebody left the lights on at the tennis court. I got to go down there and turn them off. So that's why he bought this phone system. And he rigged every light on the property to this phone system. So if a light was left on, he'd dial a 3-digit. He could turn it on or off, either way. So that's what he did with the phone system. In addition to that, he proceeded to tell me that Barbara Streisand used to take tennis lessons out of his house. And one of the things that the neighbors were always complaining about, because of these phone stations that were also outdoors, were phones ringing all the time. And they're hearing phones ringing all the time. So what does he do? He goes back and rigs it again. And for the phones that were outside, anytime that the phone would ring, you would hear birds chirping. That's what he did to the phones out there, so as not to bother the neighbors anymore. And Barbara Streisand said to him, she said, it's so pleasant coming out here for my tennis lessons because birds are singing all the time. It's just amazing. I don't know how they do that, but so that was what he did with that. So overall, with him, as I said, we were just, totally amazed at what this man has done. And conversely, he couldn't get over what we do. I guess the magic of television, whatever. So the next day, we did the shoot, first day of shooting, out on the driveway with her and her Rolls Royce. And one of the things we had to be particularly careful of is that anytime she was outdoors and the cameras weren't rolling, there was a umbrella over her. I think you can guess why. Yeah, she could not be exposed to the sun. I'm guessing that the plastic might have melted or something. I don't know, but I guess that's what the concern was. So anyway, I'll sum it up with, she was very, very cooperative with us. I'm sure you have all heard stories about what prima donnas, celebrities are, and what prima donnas they can be and how difficult they can be. And I'm here to tell you that in my experience and all the years that I worked with folks like that, it wasn't the celebrities who were tough. It was their people, as the ones known from Have Your People Call My People. These people tended to be anal apertures of the first water. And they would kind of strut around to impress you about how important they were, and they're protecting their turf. But we had, there's one guy who's, again, celebrities of her status, talent or not, would have a personal manager and a business manager, personal manager and a business manager. The personal managers were the toughies. The business managers, they handled the business. Her personal manager, who was out there on the shoot, now mind you, the temperature we were shooting was in the early 80s, as I think, like 82, 83 degrees. And this was the personal manager who was a real bleep, walking around in leather pants. And I thought to myself, I hope you get the biggest case of diaper rash that's ever known to man. I just think that would be really cool. So anyway, we finished the shoot after, 2 days. We did 2 days of shooting with her. And on the last night, went to dinner with her and Ryan and Lucille Ball and Gary Morton. Yeah. Probably one of the most interesting nights I've ever spent in my life, and I will not tell you a thing about it other than we had dinner together. So that pretty much concludes the Zsa Zsa portion. Ron, let's go to Mr. Namath. Okay. Shooting a lazy boy spot. Joe was still playing in those days, and I think he was playing for the Rams at that time. We shot in the Lazy Boy showrooms in New York. Now, in setting up the shoot, one of the things that was, I had to deal with the personal manager. So I'm on the phone with the personal manager. You know, I'm still here in Chicago, but I'm on the phone with the personal manager. He said, there's one prerequisite for the shoot that you absolutely have to honor. I said, what's that? He said, you are to have on hand, not a portable cooler, but a plug-in refrigerator where you're shooting, stocked with Michelob. And I said, I don't know if we can do that. He said, well, yeah, you can do that, because if you don't do that, you don't have Joe. So you can only imagine what was going through my head. Am I going to be dealing with somebody who's bombed out of his gourd, trying to do these spots and so forth? So we had the refrigerator, and we had it stocked with Michelob, and Joe comes walking in at 8:30 in the morning, sucking on a Michelob. And I'm thinking, ooh, this is going to be tough. And how many of you, raise a hand, are familiar with the term functioning alcoholic? Yeah. They're able to consume large quantities, and they're talking to you just as I am talking to you, just sober as a judge. And I know this from first experience because my son is a recovering alcoholic, and I went through it with him as well. So now we're working with, and one of the guys from Lazy Boy would tell me when Joe would do a trade show, wherever they would hold these things, he would sit there and down a case and a half and just be as sober as a judge, seemingly. So we did the spots with Joe. And again, there's just so much you can get out of guys like him. And this is not putting him down. That's not what he does. He plays football, damn well at it. But there was one aspect of him that surfaced during the shoot that I find still so very, very touching. Namath and one of his former teammates from when he played with the Jets had a football camp during the summer. It was a youth football camp. And when he would talk about that football camp and talk about the participants in the camp, he would almost just glaze over. He would talk about them using only one word, the children. It wasn't the brats, it wasn't the crumb snatchers, it wasn't the rugrats, it wasn't the little, it was the children. And you could tell there was a great deal of sincerity in talking about, the football camps and, what it did for the children. And that impressed me a great deal. So that's what I've got for Joe Namath. Yep, Wally Schirra is the next one. This is classic. In 1979, if I'm not mistaken, January to be specific. How many of you were living here in January of 79? Do you remember what happened? Yes, a biggie. Okay. I'm now down in Dallas. I'm running Southwest Teleproductions in Dallas. And we had sales representation here in Chicago, as well as Minneapolis, and of course in Dallas. And the guy who handled sales up in the Chicago area had sold a shoot for an ad agency that was based here, and the client was Realty World. That was, any of you remember them, Realty World? They were kind of like a Remax, I guess, or one of those. And so they had hired us at Southwest Telepressions out of Dallas to go shoot these commercials with Wally Schirra, the astronaut, as the spokesperson. And we're going to be shooting in LA. Okay. So, I got my crew together and we go out to LA. And of course, obviously we have, pre-production meetings over the phone with the client, going over storyboards, scripts, so forth and so on. We went out to LA, and the night before the shoot, I actually did have dinner with Wally Schirra to talk about the shoot and just, kind of get to know him a little bit. So there's some rapport between us as we're, going to do the shoot. Wally was represented by Marty Ingalls. Do you remember him? Yeah, he was a comedian, used to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show and things like that. Well, Marty had switched to a new profession, and rather successfully. He handled celebrity talent. And Wally Schirra just happened to be one of his clients. So we were shooting in the city. We were actually going to be shooting for 3 days. One day we were shooting in the city of Orange in their municipal center outdoors, which is what you go to California for. The next day we were going to be shooting at Newport Beach, again, outdoors. The third day of shooting entailed actually shooting indoors at a rental stage in Hollywood, which is very common. Very few producers out there have their own stages, but you rent a stage and you bring stuff in and so forth. So the first day, so I had dinner with him, a very pleasant evening, and it's not every day you get to talk to an astronaut. So I get out to location the next morning, and he's got a limo, of course. And I get out there, and he's standing outside the limo. He said, "Bob, come here." I said, "What?" He says, "Marty's on the phone. He needs to talk to you." Okay. And so I get inside the limo, and having a phone in the car in those days, this is 1979. It was still fairly new, but I said, "What's up?" He said, "Well, there's a problem." So I said, "Okay." So I get on the phone. So now I've got Ingalls on the phone. And he said, "You're not shooting today." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "I don't have the check that I'm supposed to have as a downstroke for Wally's fee." He said, "The client was supposed to bring it out here, to give, to Wally." I said, "Well, the client is snowed in Chicago." I've heard that crap before. I said, "Marty, call Channel 12 or whatever, he's snowed in. Nobody's getting out. Nothing was going anywhere." And he just went on and on. He said, "I've heard this kind of bullshit before," and just carried on. And he was really nasty about it. He said, "But you're not shooting today. Let me speak to Wally." So I hand the phone to Wally. I said, "He wants to talk to you." So Wally's on the phone with him, and I'm listening. He says, "Yeah, Marty. Uh-huh. Yeah, okay, Marty. No, I understand, Marty. No, all right, I'll talk to you later, Marty. Bye." Puts the phone down and he says, "F him. Let's go to work." So that was kind of cool. Willie slide, Ron. There we go. 1973. Ward's has hired Willie Moscone. The sporting goods department had hired Willie Moscone to kind of endorse his pool tables. Of course, they endorse their pool tables. And I know a lot of you know who Willie Moscone was, and a lot of you don't, but the greatest pool player of all time, bar none. If you saw the movie The Hustler, the original one, not Color of Money, but all of the trick shots that were in that movie were done by Willie Moscone. And again, now we were shooting. I was still living here now. We were shooting up in Minneapolis at Northwest. So I had dinner with Willie the night before. I sounded like I ate a lot, but that's how you get to know these people. And I was really concerned because, here's the greatest shooter of all time. And I had almost a nightmarish thought the day before. I said, what if he comes in and says, "You expect me to do my shots on that piece of crap?" I was really worried about it. And we didn't talk about it. We just talked about anything other than, actually doing the shoot. So now the shoot day came about, and as you can see, that's me with, I used to have hair, and there's Willie, and of course there's a nice glamour shot of him down the lower left-hand corner. The experience of working with Willie Moscone it was like I was working with my grandpa. I was all of, I think, 33 at the time, and he was, I think he was like 60, maybe 63, something like that, but just the kindest, sweetest, gentlemanly, and here's a guy, who you figure he's got to be tougher than nails, being the greatest pool shooter of all time. And it was, as I said, it was like working with my grandpa. It was a delight. Now, there was always the guy up the upper left-hand corner. That's Minnesota Fats, also known as Rudolph Wanderone. And Rudolph Wanderone actually was known as New York Fats prior to the film or the book, The Hustler. the Minnesota Fats character in the Hustler was fabricated for that movie and for the book. But Rudolph Wanderone was not Minnesota Fats prior to that happening. Now, we worked with him at Ward's too. We just rolled some footage of him shooting, and make no mistake, he was a great pool player too. But he really couldn't hold Willie's chalk. He just wasn't the same. And he was kind of a bleep himself too. I remember we were meeting with him, and one of the secretaries came in. Anybody like a Coca-Cola? He said, "Can I have 3?" You know, yeah, fine. And then bring him 3. He maintained that Moscone was ducking him for years, wouldn't play him. So in 1978, with the right amount of financial consideration, Fats and Willie had a televised pool shootout that was filmed at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. It was a $15,000 winner take all. It was a lot of money in 1978. And in fact, I'd take it now too, but that's beside the point. Willie just cleaned his clock. They played 5 different games. There was 8-ball, 9-ball, rotation, and just straight pool and so forth. And Willie won all 5 categories. So that was the end of Fats shooting his mouth off about Willie. And again, just a wonderful experience shooting with a legend like that. I mean, it'd be like taking piano lessons from Chopin, you know. Well, while we were shooting, I said to Willie, I said, "Hey, would you do me a favor?" He said, "What?" I said, "Would you play me a game of 9-ball?" That was his main game. And I said, "I just want to be able to say that I was beaten by Willie Moscone at 9-ball." So he said, "Well, I'll go you one better." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm playing one-handed." Now, in those days, I was shooting a lot of pool. I really was. To go out at lunchtime, instead of being wined and dined by studio reps, one of my producers and I would go out at least 3 times a week, and we'd shoot pool and have a sandwich while we were shooting pool. Excuse me. So we played a game of 9-ball, and his stroke was so true. He could actually take the cue, lay it on the rail of the table, and go like this. And he was able to, sink shots that way. Well, I was playing a pretty good game. We got down. The object, of course, is the 9-ball. Is the last one you want to get in. So we were down to the 8 and the 9-ball, and I was up, and I went to shoot the 8-ball and position the cue ball so that I could finish it off with the 9. And unfortunately, I got a wiggle on the 8th. And then with his one-handed shot, he knocked in the 8 and the 9. But I did get beaten by Willie Moscone at 9-ball. Okay, now you can show us George Goebel. Yeah. George Goebel was a spokesman for years for a regional oil company called Vickers Petroleum. And I started doing shoots with him, I want to say about maybe 1978, 79. The picture that you see on the left-hand side, that's me leaning against the car and talking to him. The guy in front, interesting story unto himself. He was a producer from the ad agency who since left the advertising business, an incredible guitar player, self-taught. The agency was out of Oklahoma City, and his name is Billy Panda. And Billy wanted to come back. He was from out like Crystal Lake or one of those areas out there. He wanted to come here and try to get into the music business as a guitarist. "Can you set me up with any people?" I said, "Sure." I set him up with a number of jingle houses here that I knew from my time here. And all of them called me up and said, "Where the hell did you find this guy? He's amazing." So he came to Chicago, and he became like the #1 call for a studio guitarist. And but anyway, back to George. George was just very unassuming. And those of you who remembered his shtick, it was just, old lonesome George and old cranky Alice, and just would go on and on like that. And George, any of you, by show of hands again, what is referred to as a hollow leg? Mm-hmm. Okay, for those of you who don't know, a hollow leg is something that is part of an individual who can drink and drink and drink. And I'm not talking water. Drink and drink and drink, and it doesn't affect them. That's what was with Mr. Goebel. And he would come in the morning. We'd have like an 8:30 or 9 o'clock call. He'd come in the morning with a glass in his hand. It was a glass of water. About 10:30 or 11 o'clock, he would ask for his other water. It began with a V, and it wasn't water. So you never knew it. And he didn't have much to say when we were doing between sets. He did his thing. We rarely shot past 2 o'clock in the afternoon with him because he was just done. And but again, a nice man, and he was very effective as what he did, which is his low key, delivery, and of course hustling Vickers Petroleum. They had a whole slew of service stations out in the west and southwest. We would generally shoot. This still was shot up in Tulsa, and we also shot with him out in Colorado Springs for a week one time. And very pleasant to work with. Nothing really remarkable about him except for the Howlett. That's was that. AJ Foyt, please. Okay. This is kind of funny. The shot in the upper left-hand corner was put into it was sent out as a publicity shot, and it was sent to a magazine in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that would, it was one of we call it the brag rag, that would show advertising agencies bragging about their stuff, production companies bragging about their stuff. This particular shot cracks me up because I was telling Ron last week, the caption to it, I don't think you can read it, but it says that I'm talking to the spokesperson for Vickers Petroleum. Doesn't mention his name. Well, that is AJ Foyt. And AJ Foyt is a 4-time winner. He's the only 4-time winner of the Indianapolis 500. And he lives in the Houston area. And he's a character. He is a bona fide tough guy. So we're supposed to be shooting at his home. Well, we get out to location. I've got my people with me, and he's not there. So I said to the guys from the ad agencies and from Vickers Petroleum, well, where is he? Well, his mother's in the hospital. He had to go see her first. And then I said, well, you realize we're on the clock. And, if we run to overtime, this transcends whatever we bid for this production. Yeah, we know, don't worry about it. He finally shows up about 10:30. Introductions are made. AJ, this is Bob Dauber. He's going to be your director today. And he shook hands with me with his left hand, which I found rather odd. So I said to the guys, this is after he was out of earshot, of course. I said, what's with the left hand? Is he protecting his shifting hand? No, he had punched somebody out a couple of nights before in a bar. And you could tell that this man, when you were just sitting with him, there was controlled rage, just boiling within him. And so, of course, I started kidding him about losing his hair because I could do that. Even, I still had some over here, but nothing up here. And the fun with him, again, you only get so much out of people like this in terms of a performance. If someone had held a gun to his head and say, AJ, pronounce the word Valvoline. Valvoline, no. Valvoline. Valvoline, no. Valvoline. After 42 takes, the client said, we'll go with Valvoline. This man could not say it. So, but again, an interesting character because when you talk to some people and you have your sixth senses telling you something about them, that's what it was with him. Just controlled rage. Okay. Next up, one of my favorites, Patrick Duffy. This was in the mid 80s. Patrick had been hired by a mobile home manufacturing company and called A1 Mobile Homes. And the first time in working with them, now these A1 mobile homes, these are not, now they call them manufactured housing. They don't call them mobile homes anymore. It doesn't say how well they're manufactured, but they're manufactured housing. So we're doing these spots with him, and I had a chance to kind of be around the corner with him. And I said, and it's a really, really nice guy. And he was very popular, of course, because of the Dallas series. And I said to him, why are you doing these? And he looked at me and he said, Bob, he said, I've heard that there's a lot of money to be made in commercials. So I thought maybe I'll cut my teeth on a regional account, see how it goes. So every 6 weeks for 3 years, Patrick, if he was in town shooting Dallas, he'd just come over to the studio. If he wasn't shooting Dallas, He'd come in from LA. Every 6 weeks, he would come in, and we would do what were called wraparounds. We'd shoot the opening to a commercial, the close to a commercial, and then the rest of it would get filled in with stock footage of the homes that we took pictures of, these mobile homes. And I was telling Ron when we were putting these things together, I said that the commercial shoot, was very incidental to the day. He'd come in, say if he got there 9:30, we were done by 11 because we got our wraparound shot. And the rest of the day was spent eating pizza, drinking beer, and telling jokes. And again, just one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet, and did have talent. He could sell these things. So that was him. In 1986, Coca-Cola celebrated their 100-year anniversary. And as a lot of corporations do, they produce these big dog and pony corporate shows, multi-million-dollar productions, even back then. And some of them travel, they'll go around regional and so forth. But there was a company in Dallas that their specialty was corporate television. And this particular company hired every facility that they could get to participate in this. So this was a lot of work. It was a big job. Southwest Teleproductions was fortunate enough to be one of them chosen. There were shoots in Dallas. There were shoots in Georgia, of course, where they're based. There were shoots in Florida. I mean, all over the place. And Dom DeLuise was the key performer for all of these multiple extravaganzas that they were doing. So about 3 months after the events themselves, the contracting company in Dallas decided to throw an appreciation party. And so they invited all of the participating companies to this really nice reception. It was on a Friday night. And with me being the head of Southwest Teleproductions, I was invited to the reception. My best friend in Dallas, a man by the name of Jim Rowley, wonderfully talented multicam director. He was the lead director for all of these shows that were being put together for Coca-Cola. So I went to the party and I hooked up with Jim at the party. And then here came Dom DeLuise. Introductions are made. Dom, I'd like you to meet my good friend, Bob Dauber. He's with Southwest Teleproductions. Dom DeLuise grabs my arm. Honest to God, grabs my arm. He says, "Don't you leave my side all night." I'm like, "What?" He says, "Don't you leave my side all night." And all night long, there's lots of people coming up to me. "This is Bob Dauber. He's my best friend in the world. We are the closest." It just went on and on all night long. That's all there is to it, Nothing else beyond that, but that was him. He was nuts, So, okay, I'll do one real quick one, and then I'm going to run a little long, Ron, but maybe 5 minutes. Yeah. Up in Minneapolis, there was a young lady that I used to do a lot of work with. She was an on-camera spokesperson and a talented actress. Her name is Joan McKinley. And we were doing a shoot, again, back in the mid-'70s. It was just before Thanksgiving, and we were in between setups on the shoot, and we started talking about music. And so Joan said to me, well, I was raised around music, so, it's part of my life. She said, my dad was a musician. So who was your dad? She said, oh, you never heard of him. I said, try me. Okay, did you ever hear of Ray McKinley? I said, oh my God. Anybody know who Ray McKinley was? I know Jim does. He was Glenn Miller's drummer. Very, very, very famous. Yeah. And I said, my God, I'm sitting with royalty. You're his daughter. And she told me that Buddy Rich used to come over to the house, wherever they were living, and work out with her dad on the drums. And Buddy Rich, in my humble opinion, the greatest drummer of all time. But imagine just being exposed to something like that. So that's just a brief one on that. But now, yes. My last full-time gig in Dallas was working on Barney and Friends, the Purple Dinosaur Show. I worked on it for 7 years. I was hired in 1997. I got a phone call from them. They said, hey, Bob, we need a post-production supervisor. Would you come and talk to us? Sure. So I spoke with them, and I subsequently got hired to be the post-production supervisor. Now, what a post-production supervisor does, once a show is filmed, everything that's involved in finishing it is under the aegis of the post-production supervisor. So I'm in charge of editing. I'm in charge of music. I'm in charge of art. I'm in charge of animation, if there is any. I'm in charge of compliance because you're making shows for PBS and you have these things down to the frame as far as being compliant with their regulations and so forth. So I thought, this is really cool. I'm 57 years old and I'm making television for 2- and 3-year-olds. Keeps you young. But there's a story that I want to share with you. Each year we would shoot 20 PBS episodes. And then at the end of the shooting of the 20th show, we would generally strike our standing set and then we would start working on home videos for the next 3 or 4 months, which were much more involved than the daily shows that were done. But also at Barney, there was a never-ending parade. I don't mean to say that it was constantly going on, but what it did, of Make-A-Wish kids coming in to do a meet and greet with Barney, to tour the set, things like that. This particular year, because it's I just never get tired of telling this. What the plan was, when these kids that come in, just in case you don't know, some of them are terminally ill, some of them are facing amputation. I mean, there's some bad stuff going on in their lives. So this particular year, there was a plan that when we finished, shooting the last of the episodic stuff, we're going to clear the set of all of our children, and we'll still have our standing, regular set, and then Barney and the 2 smaller dinos are going to be there. And they were bringing in a girl who was 14 years old. She had very advanced cerebral palsy. She was confined to a wheelchair. She had to wear a bib all the time because she would drool quite a bit. She was pretty much non-communicative. She was not in good shape. But the plan was for that day was to wheel her onto set, and then Barney and the 2 smaller dinos were going to do a song and dance routine. And we shot this just like we were shooting a regular show. 4 cameras, and this was going to be edited down, with, finished editing and so forth, and presented to her family as a gift, for the child. So everything was going as planned. They wheeled her onto the set. We rolled the music. Barney and the dinos did the song and dance thing, and that was fine. Then we did the national anthem. And for those of you who don't know what the Barney national anthem is, it's the I Love You song. So here's the I Love You song rolling, Barney and the 2 dinos singing. And the girl, to this day, the girl pushed herself up out of the chair and put her head on Barney's chest. And I just thought to myself, Bob, you got to feel real good about what you do for a living. Thanks.
That was wonderful. And I've heard some of this before.
Wait a second. Before I forget, Ron, I want to tell this audience and your audience at home too, that this presentation would not have been done as well as I think it's been done without this man's help, with Ron Mantegna's help. So.
Well, thank you, Bob. You and I both know that there is a couple more hours there. So I am personally going to talk to the program's chair of the Tuesday Club about having a speaker like you come back. So think about that, but I'll talk to him. Now we'll get any questions that are coming. I have to tell you that we really don't have questions from the big crowd that we've got on Zoom, over 50, because they're just enthralled by what you presented. But we'll let the auditorium have a Q&A, and then I definitely have one. Go ahead.
Any questions or comments?
And a very serious note, when the young lady put her head on Barney's chest, was he able to continue? I mean.
Well, that's all pre-recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
you've got some extra time. How about telling us a story about how Lucille Ball and your dinner with her was?
He can't do that.
Thanks, Ron.
Bob, this is recorded.
My mouthpiece.
Yeah, I used to protect Bob on the legal side when I ran that the development section.
Ron was our liaison with the Federal Trade Commission because every time we did a script, it had to go through Ron to make sure that we weren't saying anything that was not kosher for the Federal Trade Commission.
Come into the center and talk to Bob privately. Well, you're at the center, so when this is over, you do that. Any other questions from the auditorium?
Did Wally Schirra ever get paid?
Oh, sure he did. I'm sure he did. No, the thing with Mike, the thing was totally kosher. It's just that Marty Ingles is, that's all I can tell you.
Hold on. I guess that's it.
Well, we got a live one.
Sorry, I didn't see Don.
Bob, that was great.
Thank
I read the book by Jerry Della Fabina, and it was wonderful. I wonder if those books there's some others too. Lois, what was his?
George Lois.
George Lois has a great.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're in the library because
Sure.
even if you weren't in advertising, you can read these books. They're hilarious. These are true stories.
Yeah.
And someday I'll write my book.
One thing I forgot to mention, his book from those wonderful folks who gave you Pearl Harbor, that was used kind of as the basis for the beginning of the TV series Mad Men. If you watch that, did any of you watch Mad Men? Fabulous. The first time I watched the first episode I squirmed. I felt I was visibly uncomfortable watching it because it was so real to life. And I worked at a big agency on Michigan Avenue. I had one stint of work at Ward's, and then I left. Every copywriter's dream was to get hired by a Michigan Avenue ad agency. And I got hired by a big one, and I was there for just about 3 years, and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. And when Ward's got serious about television, this was back in the late 60s, Fred, the one that I alluded to, called me up and he said, hey, we're starting to get kind of serious about TV. He said, I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of coming back. And the old adage about you can't go home again. I was very nervous about it, but he picked me up at my house. We both lived in Glenview at the time. And he picked me up at my house and we drove downtown. We talked about it, and then we had another meeting. And another gentleman who has since passed away, and Ron knew him too. His name was Rock Anderson, R-O-Q-U-E, Rock. But Rock really became my mentor and a very, very close friend. And he plucked me out of the print advertising department where Ron was copy chief at the time. I worked there exactly 2 months and 27 days, and Rock had taken over a position in the promotional planning department. He took me with. And then the broadcast thing opened up and Rock took that over and he brought me with. And so he really was the guy who gave me my wings, so to speak. Anything else?
We've got one question.
Yes, sir.
Bob, this is somewhat personal, but if you don't want to answer, that's fine. How did you make the transition from leaving Ward's into the industry? Or did you get an offer from a firm, or did you bail out when Ward's?
No. This was long before they bailed. I did see the writing on the wall, though. What was going on there when Mobil bought Marcor. Marcor was a holding company that was Montgomery Ward and Container Corporation of America. And I saw the writing on the wall of what they were doing. Mobil, and Ron might argue with me about this, might not, but they ran that company into the ground. Ward's had turned the corner. They were doing well. And they ran that company into the ground. So no, first, Dallas. When I was working at the ad agency, I wound up making several production trips to Dallas. And the reason that that happened, Texas is a right to work state. And so the agency, when they were producing commercials and they didn't have the budget for union talent rates, they'd go to Texas because you could work, negotiate your own deals with talent. So I kind of learned about, dealing with that, and I made several trips to Dallas. So then when Ward's asked me back, and because I had this Dallas experience under my belt now, working with different just a couple of studios down in Dallas, when I was back at Ward's and we had things to do, I started taking some or my other producers, sending these productions, taking them down to Dallas. So making the transition for me was not all that startling because I kind of knew the terrain fairly well and I knew the business very well. As we worked, one of the things that was great about working at Ward's, and this is one of the things that I used to say about going to work at an ad agency. In fact, the man who hired me at Needham Harper and Steers was the agency that I went to work for, and it was a top 20 agency nationally. And my first day of work, he said, Bob, this is your first agency job. I just want you to keep one thing in mind. I said, what's that? The ad agency business is 15% commission and 85%. And he was right, So,
all right, I'm going to get into the, Bob, I'm going to get into the Q&A that came from chat. First 2 points about Montgomery Ward, okay? Because I have to defend myself, as you know.
Why?
Having run the big department there, I can tell you that number one, I know the main reason that you left was because we had sack lunches and we only took 20 minutes. So that was point one.
That's what you did. I didn't. I was out shooting pool.
Understood. I knew that.
Thanks for coming, Mike.
The other point with respect to Montgomery Ward, mobile didn't so much run us to the ground. Retailing changed tremendously, but mobile had a bunch of money because of Nixon's gas crisis that was developed during Nixon years. They had so much profit, they had to plow it into a company. So they bought Montgomery Ward.
Yeah.
And they asked me to be one of the liaison persons to work with them. And I did. And they said, hey, Ron, when you go back, tell your officers, tell everybody to come back. We're sharing our 5-year plan. We want to know your 5-year plan. Well, I went back, and as you know, Bob, we only had a 5-month plan.
I had a 5-minute plan.
There was a 5-minute plan. So retailing had changed. But let's go into the people that have asked some questions of you.
Okay.
First, a comment from Karen Jacobs, who said, Jacobson, I'm sorry. Well, wait, let me get to this was a comment from Ed. I was told that the most fun you can have with your clothes on was trading government bonds as per the Preppy handbook. No comment necessary on that one.
I will make a comment.
Well, go ahead.
Raise the bar.
Karen Jacobson is saying, I hope by one part you met Mrs. Gabor, fabulous accent. But then she asks a serious question. Who was the most fun celebrity to work with? And Margaret is saying, who was the most fun to work with and who made you the most angry? And I guess I'll ask a third, but go ahead. It's tied along the same lines.
All right. Well,
last question. Go ahead.
All right, Patrick.
Who was the most fun? Who was the most angry?
Patrick Duffy by far.
Was the most fun?
Yeah, genuinely nice person.
Who got you the maddest?
Roger Staubach.
Roger Staubach.
Yeah.
Lou Solomon has a question. I want to have Lou ask that. Go ahead, Lou.
Okay, Bob.
Wait a second, Lou. Some
Okay,
people
I'm waiting.
why I said Roger Staubach.
Okay,
His political leanings were just at the time were just to the right of Hitler's, and so when we would take a lunch break and we'd be in the eating area and he would start expounding on his political philosophies, there was a mass exodus from the room.
Okay, go ahead, Lou.
okay. What's the story between Jack Ryan and Zaza? Why were they in separate houses?
I guess because they could, right, Bob?
Ooh, I think there's one word to say that answers that. Hollywood.
Really?
Yeah. Is there anything normal about that out there?
No, no.
Well, there's your answer. Yeah,
Did you answer, Bob,
yeah.
did you answer the question about who made you angry, or is that also Starbuck?
No, the most fun I said was Patrick Duffy, and the one who made me angriest was Roger Staubach.
Okay, who was the most surprising? In other words, you were prepared to meet somebody and you were shocked because, wow, it was totally unlike, or you didn't expect it to be that way.
Well, I could say that about Namath. I figured, here's Broadway Joe, and I'm thinking ring-a-ding-ding and that whole thing, and he was just as sweet as could be. Very, very concerned about whether we were pleased with what he did. But as I said, there's just a limit as to, that's not what he does. He's a football player. Zsa, I thought she was going to be a real bleep, and she wasn't. She was very, very sweet. She was as accommodating as she could be. But there's just, there's not a whole lot there. But Patrick Duffy, as I said, by far, we had more fun. And I shared a story with Ron. In 1986, I had left Southwest Teleproductions to go out on my own as an independent producer director. My son, at the time, had gone to cosmetology school in Dallas, and so he wanted to go out to the Sassoon Academy on the West Coast in Santa Monica to get his master's degree. And believe me, what that school cost for the short time he was there was the equivalent of a master's degree at a university. And my son, who was also, and I mentioned about, him being a recovering alcoholic, at the time, he was having a good time. He was living it up, and I put him up in a hotel in Santa Monica, and he gravitated to Venice Beach. And Venice Beach is where the freaks hang out, and all kinds of things happen there. And it's a happening place for a youngster. I don't blame them. And he met some guys who were affiliated with a kind of an obscure church. And I don't even remember the name of it, Ron, but and I shared this with him the other day. It's not Scientology, but it's some sort of really out there kind of church. And Patrick Duffy was a member of it. And I knew that he was. We would discuss it when he would be in Dallas. Well, about 2 weeks prior to my son going out to Santa Monica and finding Venice Beach, Patrick's parents were murdered. They were murdered in they had a kind of a bar as part of it was a house, and it was a bar and a sandwich shop, and it was all in one. And I believe it was in Montana. I'm not positive of the locale, but they were murdered. As I said, 2 weeks before this incident. My son meets a couple of kids at the beach who were talking about that there's a meeting that night of this particular church and that Patrick was going to be there. And he was there. And my son went up to him and he said, "Hi, I'm David Dauber." He said, "You know my parents, Bob Dauber and Donna Royal." "Oh, yes, lovely folks. I did a lot of work with them." And, that was all there was to it. But there was, A, the recognition from Patrick, B, the consideration given to my son instead of "get away from the kid," that kind of thing. So I would have to say, but he was the most fun. I mean, as I said, when he would come in, the shoot was incidental to the day.
Bob, we thank you, and we'll see you next Tuesday when we go to your programs committee meeting. But thank you for a wonderful program.
Thanks very much.